Hi, I'm Jude. Welcome to my Java programming course. In this lesson, we are going to learn everything about methods or functions in Java programming language. This video is part of a complete Java course I have published on YouTube. If you are interested in becoming a Java expert, I would highly encourage you to check out the rest of the videos as well. Any digital system has certain behavior or actions that it can perform. It is thanks to set of instructions that has been programmed into that digital system. So that we can say behaviors are set of instructions that perform a specific task. I have listed down few examples so that you can get an idea about what are behaviors when it comes to digital systems. When you are developing software applications, you write set of instructions that can range from hundreds to millions of lines of code. When that happens, you need to understand the logic behind your software application. There are situations where you can extract out the common logic into separate reusable groups. How do you really do that? Yes, that's why you need to understand how to write functions or methods in Java programming language. How do functions work? They take inputs, then execute set of instructions inside the function. After that, they provide output values back to the caller. These two English words refers to the same idea, but there is a subtle difference. You know, my dear students, Java is an object-oriented programming language, which means we almost work with objects. Function is an independent repeatable action. On the other hand, method is also a function but associated with an object. That's why when it comes to Java, we oftentimes use the word method instead of the word function. Because in Java, we always work with objects, that's why methods are being referred. Methods do not exist without an object. Method needs to have an association or relation into an object. How do we write methods in Java? You must follow this particular structure when it comes to writing methods in Java. Start with the output or the return data type. Then the name for the method and followed by the round brackets. Inside the round brackets, we define the parameters. Parameters are basically the inputs to your method. And then we start the curly braces. Inside these opening and closing curly brace, what we call as the method body. You can write your instructions for your method that has been extracted out to define a common logic. Methods are repeatable actions you can execute multiple times as you wish. Let's try to create a simple Java file and try to write a simple method. Let's call it as a calculator. I call the file as calculator.java. Please note the capital C letter. So here on line number 3, I'm going to write a new method in Java. Let's create a new method in this class to add two numbers. Let's imagine they are whole numbers. In this case, they are integers. So I should understand what is the output of this function. The output of this function is an integer. Therefore, I use the int data type. I'm going to name this function as add two numbers. Then followed by the parentheses. Inside the round brackets or the parentheses, I need to define the inputs that I expect to this function. As I'm going to add only two numbers, I need to have two input values. I will call them as x and y. After the round brackets, I need to start my method body, which is denoted by the curly braces. I'm going to calculate the answer, which is also the data type of integer. If I leave this function as it is, I will get an error because at the beginning of this method definition, I mentioned that I will return an integer value. But as you can see, inside the method body, I did not return an integer value. Therefore, Java will complain about this particular contract broken state. I must return an integer. In this case, I can return a dumb value like this. This is completely fine. But in terms of logic, this is completely wrong because we are always returning number 0 regardless of what are the values that has been passed. Therefore, the correct modification is we should return the answer that has been calculated inside the method. I can also simplify this function into a single line. I can simply say, instead of answer variable being assigned, I can simply return the following expression. And I cannot have multiple return statements. Therefore, this particular scenario will be incorrect. I need to have only one return statement in this particular scenario. How do we define multiple inputs to a method? It's very easy. Use comma-separated structure under the parameters section. Here I have provided a very basic example. I started with the output data type or the return type, which is the double type of value that I must return from this method. And then I provided a name called as my complex method. Then inside the parameters section, I have 3 different inputs or parameters. They are followed by the data type and the name. You can define parameters according to your will. There is no restriction. It can be from the same data type or multiple data types. As we have defined the double as the return type, which means this method must return a double value as the output. As I have here, return 0.01 as the return value, which complies the return type of this method. Sometimes you need to write functions which do not return any value, which means they do not have any output data type. How do we write such methods? Yes, that's where we need to use this special keyword in Java called void. The English word void means nothing, emptiness. That's the same idea when it comes to this particular keyword. It is a reserved keyword in Java, which is to denote that a method do not return any value. Well, my dear students, I hope you have a good understanding how to deal with the return type when it comes to defining a method. Return type and return value must comply with one another, which means the return value of the method must match the return type of the method definition or the method signature. Return keyword in Java is a special reserved keyword. We use that particular keyword to return a value from a function. So when you have a return statement, after that there cannot be anything because we are exiting from that point in the function. One last thing, when you have a method with a return data type defined in the method signature, you must return a value from the function body that matches that particular return data type. If not, you must define the return type as void. Here is a simple example of a method implementation which returns an integer value. We call the method name as getPostalCode and it does not have any input values. When you simply call this function, you will magically get a number. In this case, it will be always number 123. Usually the return statement will be the last statement that you write inside the method body. Well, my dear students, I think it's the time to learn about varargs or variable arguments. It is a very special construct when we are talking about input parameters to a method. Let's imagine I'm going to write a method called sum. It takes 2 numbers as inputs. But later, instead of 2 numbers, I want to add 3 numbers. Now I want to modify that method or else define a new method with 3 input parameters. Later, this grows over the time. Let's imagine as so. But that means there is no upper limit to the number of parameters included in this method. That's why in Java, we have something called variable arguments. In varargs, there is no upper limit. It is denoted with 3 dots along with the data type. That means you can have any number of parameters with the same data type that is denoted with the varargs. You can easily avoid having multiple method definitions and create a one single method with the help of varargs. So please remember this special construct when it comes to dealing with multiple number of parameters which does not have an upper limit. Also note, when you have a vararg, it's usually at the end of the parameter list. If you have multiple data types, it has to be the last thing that you define because there is no upper limit to that particular type. Well, my dear students, this is a very important section in this video. Method overloading is a term that we use to call when we are using the same method name but with a different method signature. For example, let's understand it via an example. Let's imagine we have this particular method called getCode, which accepts an integer and returns an integer value. Now let's write an overloaded method for this particular method. We can write it like follows, with instead of one integer as the input parameter, we are now having two input parameters. They are I and j. But note, this is a totally different method implementation. The first method and the second method has no relation. That's why it is important to understand method overloading is basically using the same method name but totally different implementation, totally unrelated, two different methods. Compared to the first two methods, this is also an totally independent, different method implementation. All these three methods are overloaded methods because we are using the same name but different method signatures. We can also have this particular variation with the use of variable argument. Now let's try to understand how they are being matched when we are calling from a different function or a different place. Here, the first one we have getCode, we are passing just the number 5. In this case, this particular call satisfies two different implementations. They are basically the first one or the last one where we have the varargs. In this case, Java selects the most appropriate and relevant implementation when we have multiple overloaded methods. Because having a single digit as the parameter, it's the most appropriate version. Now the second getCode call have two numbers, which is 5 and 7. That satisfy the second variation because we are passing number 5 and number 7. They both are integer numbers. Instead of going to the third variation because the third variation is not satisfying this particular call. And the third call, we are having two numbers, but the second number is a double or a decimal point. Therefore, it directly matches only to a one implementation, in this case, the third overloaded variation. In the last call, we have three different integer numbers as arguments. Therefore, only the last implementation or the last overloaded version matches this following call. Here we are again about two different English words. They are closely related, but I want to clarify them to you. Parameter is the name that we call when we are defining a method in the method signature. When we are actually passing the value, when we are using that method, that's what we call as an argument. Alright, my dear students, this is the end of this video. I want to summarize what we have learned together. You know methods in general programming, and you understand how to write methods in Java. You know what is the word void in Java means. When you are writing methods, you also have the option to have unlimited number of parameters using the variable arguments. You understand what is method overloading in Java. Also, I clarified to you two terms about parameters and arguments. With that knowledge, I invite you to join with me our next video. It is the most important video in this entire course. So if you want to take a short break, I encourage you to be prepared and get ready for the next lesson. Thank you.